Welcome to Conversations with B'rith International. I'm CEO Dan Mariaschin. Thanks for tuning in today. Well, today's subject matter is different than what we normally talk about, but nonetheless highlights a topic critical to the future of life on Earth: the rapid decline of honeybee populations. Think about it. Because of their invaluable work as crop pollinators, bees are responsible for about 1/3 of the food we eat. Harvests of vegetables, fruits, and nuts would fall without them. In fact, bees contribute about $15 billion in value annually to American crops in the US alone, according to the US Department of Agriculture. So, what would a world without bees look like? Well, my guest today, Elam Ron, doesn't want to find out. As the number of bees dwindles worldwide, agriculture faces a looming crisis. Israel-based Edete Precision Technologies, of which Ron is founder and CEO, has developed a machine that replicates crop pollination normally performed by bees. Israeli ingenuity at work once again. Ron and I will talk about his company's groundbreaking technology that aims to help stabilize long-term global food production and save honeybees from possible extinction. Before founding Edete, Ron served as vice president of R&D and engineering at Plasan, a leader in vehicle protection for security forces, where he led a team of more than 200 top engineers and scientists. He has significant experience in the agriculture industry, having spent the early part of his career in mechanical engineering, managing irrigation and mechanical systems in northern Israel. Elam, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure. My pleasure.
Well, before we delve into your research and advancements, tell us about your own story. And you ended up back in agriculture in what some might say is a niche field. And what impact did your early experiences, your early career experiences, have on what you do now? Tell us about your professional journey.
Well, I was a young man out of the army and wanted to, invest my time into what I thought to be the best way to perform Zionism. So I went up to the Galil mountains, joined the kibbutz, and worked in the fields. Later on, was drained into mechanical, which probably is my passion in R&D, and irrigation and mechanizing irrigation, computers, everything which is pretty much sophisticated in the Israeli agriculture had a lot of impact on the way we grew apple, cherries, kiwis back then, and led me to late studies of mechanical engineering in the Technion in Israel. In those years, we have already then, it was 40 years ago almost now, 35 years ago, we were facing, even in Israel, where you supposedly don't have issues with bees, we constantly struggled with the fact that agriculture on its own is dependent on this insect pollination. And you can be a very developed and very sophisticated grower with computers, with drip lines, all the innovation that the Israeli agriculture is famous of, because we don't have much water, to be less sophisticated. And back then, we realized that we are completely dependent eventually on the capability of an insect to provide us the yield after all. So that was then. Then came approximately 20 years in the defense industry, and I forgot about it completely. And when I decided to go back, I thought that it might be a serious issue and complicated and interesting for me to try to solve.
Well, let's talk about the bees a little bit more. Most people don't understand how integral bees are to our daily lives. And we think about honey, most of us, everybody's got a jar of honey in the house, but what we're talking about today really is incredibly consequential. So tell us briefly about a little bit more, because you started in your previous answer, but tell us briefly about why bees are so important and how bees make pollination possible.
Okay, so basically the fruit or the vegetables, everything that agriculture provides us, is dependent on pollination. Pollination is transfer of male pollen into female organs of different flower, from the same crop. And in nature, this process is being done by two ways. One is the wind. A lot of pollination, a lot of varieties can be pollinated by wind, while the pollen is being carried by the wind and reaches its target. But the majority of the varieties of fruits and vegetables that we eat, basically almost all the minerals and vitamins that we put into our mouth, is completely dependent on the transfer of pollen between the male and the females by insects. And when we're talking about insects in agriculture, it's 100% honeybees. Mankind learned how to work with bees. We cannot teach mosquitoes or wasps to do the job for us. They are not communicating. They don't gather in hives. We cannot transfer them. The only insect that is doing pollination and allow us to work with it is the honeybees. So the agriculture of any variety that we are familiar with, whether it's coffee or apple or almost everything you think of, is completely 100% dependent on presence of bees.
Take us through then the agricultural problem that you're solving. Essentially, why is innovation needed, and what began happening to the bees, the so-called colony collapse disorder, and how did that affect agriculture globally, particularly in Israel, which is the land of milk and honey?
So let's start from the simple fact that the population of the world is growing fast, and we don't have anymore enough land to add to the already used land. The United Nations is stating a capability to increase areas by 5 to 10%. In 20, 30 years, we have to double the amount of food globally. And the mathematics shows that in order to do so, we have to grow more on already existed areas. The results shows, and this is something which is continuing from already 20 years now, that not only that we can increase our yields on the already existed areas, but we are not reaching the optimal yield anyhow, because the agriculture now is a lot more intensive, a lot more aggressive than the capability of insects, which are not, I have to remind you, with all the respect to the bees, they are not working for us. They do the best in order to collect nectar and collect pollen for themselves. And on the way, they are doing some service to us. But it's not their target when they get up in the morning to work in agriculture. And now when you're adding to this equation, the fact that we are forcing them in huge numbers into ever-increasing areas of agriculture, while we are getting more and more aggressive in the way that we are raising our yields, adding all kinds of pesticides and limiting their natural areas for harvesting, forcing them to eat whatever we want to grow, but not always what they want to eat or naturally would have picked if you would ask them, is causing them eventually to get, I would say it gently, to get less and less in numbers. The reason why the entire insect population around the globe is decreasing is because of urbanization and very aggressive agriculture. Now, among other insects, the bees are the tip of the arrow, because not only like the rest of the butterflies and other flies that are disappearing, the bees are the first one to be actually implemented into the center of the scene by agriculture. So all the phenomena like colony collapse disorder, or just weakening of the DNA and providing them less and less capabilities to face terror like varroa mites and other stuff that are attacking them. It's basically the man-made process. So I thought that since we are the problem, on the other hand, we don't have to apologize for our will to eat and to survive. We need to solve the problem and not try to solve it through forcing more and more unnatural habitats on the bees. Now, people, when they are looking at agriculture and they see the relationship between the grower and the beekeepers and the bees and the flies, and it's always green, it's always seasonized. It looks very romantic. But when you realize that agriculture today is 100% industry, very aggressive industry, with a lot of chemical, a lot of occupying areas, and a lot of conquering natural areas from the surrounding, is leading to a simple, at least in my opinion, a simple conclusion that we are the problem and we need to solve it.
I think I read that just in recent years, millions, I think 3.5 million I read somewhere, bee colonies have actually just disappeared. So that kind of underscores the rapidity with which this problem is occurring. Now, I realize the technology that you've created, the machine that can replicate crop pollination is incredibly forward thinking. So in simple terms, can you explain how the equipment works and what the innovation process looks like? That is, to tell us about Edete's evolution. What about the trials and errors that you encountered?
Well, we are still in the process. We are not over yet. We are 3 years away from the market, and we still have a way to go. It's a complicated thing because we have decided that we are going to solve it as natural as possible, meaning that we try to help deliver the process, replacing or helping the bees to do so. And by that, reducing the amount of bees that is required now. On the other hand, the natural process should stay as is, meaning that we are not interfering eventually with the pollen. We are not mixing it with any liquids. We are not adding any intermediate or any carrier. So we needed to invent something that will allow us to actually work as the bees. On the other hand, not on the scale of a small bees. This is not a mini bees or robotic bees. This is huge machine that are covering full trees. And when we're talking about the almond in California, and if you're aware to the size of some of those trees, nut trees or pistachios, those trees are getting to be very, very big, and we need to cover them with pollen precisely. And while doing it, not changing the way nature does it. So it's on one hand, we needed a solution that will be as aggressive and as big as the agriculture requires. On the other hand, a deal with particles that are they're sized in microns, and doing it without any interference. So this is, I think, the main different way that we're doing it when you compare it to other efforts that were done 20, 30 years ago, and still people are trying. The majority don't want to deal with this complex engineering issue. So they're trying to use as much already existed machines like sprayers or other dispersers that are already existed in the agriculture. And in order to do so, they need to take these micro elements and to shift them into a micro element size. So they need to mix it, and we know that it will harm the pollen, it will harm eventually the target, the trees, the flowers. We decided that we are not going to interfere in the way nature does it, and we will have to deal it in an engineering way.
So there is a difference between insect-borne pollination and airborne, but there is a nexus here, and it is the nexus that you really are. That's what you're working on. This is the key.
Yes. Yes.
So how do you foresee the future of agricultural pollination? And do you see ultimately if there's a comeback by the bees? Do you see what you're doing as complementing the honeybees' work? And if you'd comment on something else, because you mentioned the almond trees, and here in this country, of course, in California and other places, we have these tremendous agricultural farms that harvest, in this particular case, almonds, or as you say, pistachios. The international applications here must be endless. So if you talk about that too.
We see the necessity for that all across the board, from orchards to sunflower to onions. Everywhere you look at it now, you'll see a necessity to overcome a very big issue with pollination. Pistachio, for example, is a wind pollination crop, and still they start to face serious issues now. We don't really know why. The guess of the growers is, or the investigators, is that it's due to climate changes. That even if it's a wind pollination crop, there is a gap between the time that the male are flowering and the female are flowering. And this synchronization of flowering eventually results that sometimes large areas or large blocks in the agriculture doesn't bear yield at all. Because imagine that you have a 4-week season, the male are flowering 2 weeks in advance, and they finish flowering and they're spreading all the pollen in the air and everyone is happy, but the female didn't start to flower yet. And 2 weeks later they start, but they don't have male pollen in the air anymore. So you don't get yield. So even in wind pollinator, regardless the bee, we're not even talking about bees anymore. In agriculture, there is huge issues now with pollination. The bees in some areas or some varieties, they live perfectly. If you bring bees to avocado orchard, for example, and bees don't get along well with avocado. They really don't like avocado. And if your neighbor is fortunate enough to have an apple orchard by your side, the bees will immediately go there. You can pay whatever you want to the beekeeper. You can do whatever you want. The bees will go wherever they can and wherever they like. So naturally, and over there, they will be healthy, happy, will harvest whatever they want. The hive would be stronger, etc. So the thinking is that let's us take care wherever the bees are not naturally belong, like almonds, like avocados, like whatever other, and leave them to areas that they initially would like to be, even if it's an agricultural one. So it's a kind of going hand to hand with the beekeepers. Another thing is that if you are providing sum of the service to the grower instead of tremendous amount of bees required, then the beekeepers doesn't have to transfer bees for thousands of miles across the board. If you're going in February to California and see what's going on there in the beginning of the season of the flowering of the almonds, California is now responsible for 82% of all the almonds in the world globally. They are all centered in the central valleys of California. And now we're talking about 1.25 million acres of bearing almonds, which require approximately between 2 to 2.5 beehives per acre. So we're talking about 2.5 million, 3 million, 3.5 million beehives required. The capability of the entire United States beehives services, or the one that can be transferred, is now limited to approximately 2.1 million beehives. And they are transferring them from Florida, from Maine, on full trailers, on trucks. Think about this logistics that's happening. You need to do it fast. You need to do it in 1 week or 10 days, transferring the entire population of the movable beehives of the entire USA into one central area in California. And this is a nightmare for everyone, for the growers, for the beekeepers, and mainly for the bees. Now, when we are offering a service to this region and we say the regional beekeepers can carry on and provide services wherever they are, they don't have to transfer. We will add our services to that. This is a cooperation that everyone is welcoming. The beekeepers are happy about it. The growers obviously are happy about it. And we have learned in our research, in our tests so far, that we, by providing an optimized pollination, we are increasing yield. But when we are doing it mechanically with an addition of some bees together, the increasing of the yield is going even higher, and we've got a very, very good results when we are combining our mechanical pollination and some bees pollination together.
So there really is coexistence, if you'd say, between the bees and the new technology.
And this is the future I've seen that you've asked about.
Yeah, I asked about the application internationally. What do you foresee? I mean, California, of course, extensive agriculture throughout the United States, but in other places around the world, where do you see this application being successful?
Everywhere. In China, where they grow 50% of the apples in the world, they don't have bee. They are pollinating it manually. Imagine that 50% of the apples in the world are being pollinated by hands. People actually climbing trees with branches and providing pollen manually to each and every flower they can. And when we're talking about more modern areas, and even in Israel, where you don't have anymore the capability to provide as much bees as you want, then you get less and less yield. And it's happening all over the place. It's happening in alfalfa in Poland. It's happening in sunflower all over the world. Even in wind pollinating areas, like, for example, in crops like olives, dates in the deserts, as I mentioned before, pistachios. The fact that the growers cannot control the process and they are dependent on luck, on wind, whether it's raining, whether it's sunny, whether it's dusty, you cannot control now the pollination process. So we're talking about almost every crop that you would ask, and people are calling us. They're talking about oil palms. They're calling us to help with blueberries, with the tomatoes, everywhere. People want to control. The agriculture now grower is being requested to provide double the amount he is producing now, and there is no way for him to do it, though he knows that he's doing everything perfect. He knows how to irrigate, he knows how to provide services, he knows how to provide pesticides and fungicides, but eventually the last mile of pollination, it's completely 100% uncontrolled now, dependent on luck, on season, 1 year on, 1 year off, etc. We need to overcome this issue. This is a part of the past as far as I see it.
So that's really how you're envisioning Edete's method of pollination changing the future of commercial agriculture, that the applications are global. But tell us about your next milestones. Where are you for the rest of this year and beyond? And how are current events, for example, such as the pandemic, are they affecting in any way your plans, or are you just moving ahead despite the setbacks we've had here in public health the last almost year and a half?
So there is always the issue, the economic issue. We are a startup and we are depending on investment. So on this matter, the COVID affected a lot. Everything stops. It's very hard to get investments for such I'd say future site. It's not an application that I can, provide a solution in 6 months and show progress. When you're dealing with agriculture, you need, if you ask a grower, how much time would it take you to believe that what Edete is doing is right? He would tell you, I would like to see it at least 3 to 5 years of success in a row. So this is agriculture. This is not a solution for the laboratories. It's not an R&D task. It's an agricultural task. It needs to be robust. It needs to be in a world scale size. So for a startup like us, this is one major obstacle. Since nobody is doing it, and nobody is actually have the capability to provide us enough pollen, we need to have 2 major legs of our own. One is completely botanic. We have a full botanic team which learned how to process and how to produce pollen in a very high quality, as close as possible to the way nature does it. And we are actually holding a bank of pollen because in order not to be dependent on synchronization of flowering, we need to have a bank in advance. When we get to a season and we need to pollinate, we need to bring our own pollen with us. So this is one thing. The other one is dealing with the machine of dispersing, and you need to cover a huge tree and to do it fast. If we want to cover 1.25 million acres in 4 weeks, it needs to be a very robust machine that knows how to move fast, and we need a lot of them. Our next mile is actually to scale up from the proof of concept that we've done in orchards to the large scale of thousands of acres of pilots in a real aggressive seasons of life in California agriculture. I just came back from California a week ago, and we've done initial trial in pistachio, where we pollinated approximately 100 acres for a first proof of concept there. We want to be next year in California piloting almonds and pistachios and establish the American entity to allow us to start to produce pollen in large quantities and to provide machines into the country and to start proving our capabilities to the major growers and get their approval that they see it as a part of the services they would like to pay for.
Yeah, apropos, you're visiting California. Is that how it's done with proof of concept? Do you find a grower that's interested in the technology who says, let's try it here, because they may have their own proprietary interest in this technology? Is that how it works? And have you had, in addition to the growers in California, Have you had other inquiries from other places around the world that have heard about what Edete is doing and would like to invite you to test in their places?
Well done. Actually, this is one thing we don't lack. What we do is well known over the world. Every grower in the world will tell you we have a pollination issue. We have no solution. What we're doing is something which is not interfering in the way they are growing. So it's not a matter of adjusting or for the grower to learn new methodology. He's not doing anything about it anyway. So for him, it's only a miracle if someone will help him with that. So we get so many suggestions, so many requests. Please use me as your pilot. Take some of my area and do your pilots there. We got it all over the, we're talking about, I don't want to state names, but we're getting requests for countries which has no relationship with Israel. And we're trying to take advantage of the southern hemisphere. So we've done 2 years of working in Australia in the almonds industry there. And we were welcomed like any other place. We got huge support from the Australian growers. We have an open door to growers in the US. Even the toughest one told us, please come to my orchard. I will give you as many acres as you want and try. Again, there is nothing to lose there for them. It's not something that can harm the trees. It's not something that can affect, it only can help. So on this thing, everywhere we go, people say, welcome. We want to be the first one.
Well, this is another great story from Startup Nation. And Elam, really, we wish you really the very best. And we'd like to come back at some point to kind of take the temperature, if you will, and check on your progress, because all of us need to eat. There is a tremendous need, as you've stated, as the international population, the global population grows.
Yes.
I mean, there's just so much land, there's so much arable land, there's so many ways to do this. And agricultural technology has got to be the future in order to make the most of that and to capitalize on what it is that we have and go beyond. So we wish you the very best.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for being with me today. It's been a pleasure. Our thanks to Elam Ran for speaking with us about the future of pollination and bees and the integral role of agricultural advancements and how they will play an important part in annual global food production. And thank you for tuning in to this conversation with B'nai B'rith. Well, if you enjoyed this discussion, make sure you never miss a program by subscribing to the B'nai B'rith YouTube channel, liking us on Facebook, and following us on Twitter. And be sure to visit our website, b'naibrith.org, to learn more about our important work. See you again soon, everyone. Take care.